And when you have a Supreme Court justice candidate who can't tell you what a woman is, how is an 8-year-old boy going to tell you what a man is? Well, we show him because we put him in environments where they're surrounded by good and godly men, and they're doing the outdoor kind of stuff.
What does it mean to be a man? And how do we raise boys with clarity, character, and conviction? Where can families turn for guidance for their boys that forms not just their skills, but helps their hearts be rooted in the truth? Well, today, we're going to talk about that. What does it mean to grow boys into godly men in a world that seems to be intent on undermining biblical masculinity? And we're going to talk about how outdoor adventure, discipleship, and intentional mentoring can transform boys and their families through a Christ-centered approach. What if the answer to our cultural confusion isn't just a program, but it's a movement that's shaped by scripture and servant leadership? I think that's really intriguing, and today to talk with me about it is Mark Hancock. He is the CEO of Trail Life USA. He brings a diverse background that spans advertising, ministry, counseling, and education. After founding and running a national advertising agency, he came to faith in Christ, and that led him into the ministry, including being a youth pastor and a global event director. He holds 2 master's degrees in mental health counseling and is taught at both secular and Christian colleges. Mark is a speaker. We share the stage at a lot of events. He's a media guest. He's appeared on Focus on the Family. He's appeared on Fox Nation. He was named to American Family Association's 40 Faithful, and he lives in South Carolina with his wife and 2 sons. Let's welcome Mark Hancock to the Truth Changes Everything podcast. Mark Hancock, welcome to the Truth Changes Everything podcast.
Dr. Jeff, great to be with you today.
We got to meet in person a few weeks ago, and I shared with you that I really would love to have you on the show because I love the work that you are doing with Trail Life USA. It is a time when we have got to either train up young men to be godly men, or they will turn against themselves and against their culture, and our nation might never recover.
Yeah, you've really nailed it with that, to understand the importance of raising a generation of godly men in a culture that's dismissing men and boys at a rapid pace. And so, yeah, you're right. This is a critical issue. I'm glad to talk with you about it today.
Mark, we should go ahead and address the elephant in the room here. A lot of people who are watching or listening grew up as Boy Scouts. And the Boy Scouts organization now is called Scouting USA. What happened? And they've gone from 7 million members down to 1 million members. Now, I don't mean to set up Trail Life USA in opposition to that, but we need to talk about what happened there and what our culture desperately needs to do at this moment.
Yeah, and to come at that question a couple of different ways is in 2013, the Boy Scouts of America, organization formerly known as the Boy Scouts of America, began toying with some of their foundational kind of truths and values in their Christian foundation. In fact, the founder of the Boy Scouts of America, Lord Baden-Powell, famously said, "Scouting is nothing more than applied Christianity." But the Boy Scouts clearly lost its way in over 115 years or so of its existence, and in 2013 started showing signs of radical change in the way that they saw boys, and out of that, a group of about 300 volunteers across the country started saying, "What would it look like to go back to the beginnings of Boy Scouts and maybe even double down on creating a program that's unapologetically Christian?" that would maintain and adhere to these values that are so critical. And so that's where Trail Life USA came from. But we've kind of watched as they've continued down that road. Every couple of years they go a little bit further. They started, their first thing was to permit open and avowed homosexual boys in the program, which was really difficult for churches that were chartering Boy Scout troops, because how do you manage that? Just from logistics, you have an open and avowed homosexual boy. What tent do you put him in? And just the simple logistics of it. But also, those Boy Scout troops, they were partners formal partners with that local church. And now they're in contradiction to the values of that local church. And we knew that that would put churches in trouble because it would threaten their 501c3. Because if you're not consistently communicating your values, particularly around human sexuality, you're setting yourself up for possible legal battles of what it is that you do believe. Are you a Christian organization or not? And what does that mean? So we knew that churches were going to have to struggle with that question. So that was another important reason for Trail Life, to come along and provide that unapologetic Christian stance. And then they went on to add homosexual adult leaders, transgender boys, transgender girls, adult leaders, and now girls and boys are admitted at the same rate. In fact, they recently were celebrating how they had grown by 2 or 3% in a year. They haven't grown in years. But if you look at the numbers, they lost hundreds of thousands of boys, but they gained more girls than they lost boys. And so we just think it's a matter of time before it's primarily a girls organization. So they just continue to make these decisions. Our second staff member was the former general counsel for the Boy Scouts of America, and he had written their membership standards under duress as an experiment. They asked him what would it look like to change the membership standards. He wrote that for them and handed it to them and said, if we do this, it will gut the organization. They fired him and went ahead and did it. And so he our first 5 or 6 years, he was a full-time staff member of ours and helped us to structure an organization that doesn't create the same issues or contradictions that the Boy Scouts created.
I think this whole story is so sad. I know people look at it and they scorn, like, of course, the Boy Scouts would go the way of something that's woke or politically correct. But I think it's so sad because it is a critical time in our history to focus on boys turning into young men. I had somebody who speaks on parenting, and she wrote a book about this, but her statement is so good. She said, if you don't acknowledge that your boy is turning into a man, he will fight you to prove it. And you see all kinds of fighting in the culture that boys are doing that it isn't just physical fights, it's their spiritual battles that they're engaged in, and that what they want is for someone to say, I see you becoming a man. And here you have this iconic organization that isn't able to say that anymore for reasons that were wounds that were entirely self-inflicted.
Yeah.
But actually diminished boyhood.
Yeah, and that's a really, you touched on a real tragic piece of it, because this was a voluntary thing that they went into. A lot of people think that the Boy Scouts were forced to make these kind of changes, and they just weren't. They wanted to be part of the culture. They stuck their finger in the air and said, which way is the wind blowing? We want to sit at the cool kids table. And they moved towards these kind of progressive ideals, which has caused the organization to lose so many members. But it really is tragic. We take an organization like that with a storied past of over 100 years have given us presidents and astronauts and senators and war generals and good strong men in our culture, and the Eagle Scout Award and all that wonderful stuff in this past, just decided to kind of give away that secret sauce that was turning boys into these good strong men and say there's nothing special about boys, really. This same thing will work for boys or girls or whatever. And that's just really tragic, because they had something good going on. I think it's what created things like a generation that would storm the beaches of Normandy to free the world of tyranny, or get on top of a rocket and go to another planet, or cross an uncharted ocean, the kind of risking competition and the kind of winning and focused men that for generations have really contributed to society. But over the last couple of generations, we see that being discounted so much. And it shouldn't be a value statement about men and women. It should just be a recognition that men and women are different. It's no one is more valuable than the other. They're just different, and we're designed to do different things. And that's why in Trail Life we say we may look a lot like Boy Scouts, uniforms and handbooks and camping and hiking and a robust awards program and patrols and troops and all that. But we are Christ-centered, which means we're unapologetically Christian, and we are boy-focused, which means that we believe that boys and girls are different, and that boys need a program specifically aimed at them, with them, and that they need to be surrounded by godly men. You can't build godly men without godly men. And so we have a male-centric culture that turns these boys into godly men.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a very balanced perspective. You're acknowledging young women need guiding mentors as well. They need
Absolutely.
wisdom. They need to grow into being godly women. But that's going to be different than the way that you would do it for boys. And a lot of people just curse the darkness, but you guys you lit the candle. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what that candle is. How does a group like Trail Life USA approach boys and even help them understand that there is a path to manhood? Do you have kind of an initiation ritual, or is it just something that's part of the ongoing process of what a boy does?
Oh, so I love that question. This kind of reflects back to what it is that you just said. We have a proven process. We call it a proven process for turning boys into godly men. And it starts with acknowledging some of the things that boys face in our culture today. The first one we talk about is boys are unguided. You say that both boys and girls need to be valued. That's true. That's absolutely true. But boys are at a real disadvantage. 1 in 4 boys now doesn't have a father in the household. 76% of public school teachers are women. 80-something% of Sunday school teachers are women. So girls have these wonderful examples. A single mom raising a family, what a great example that girl has in that household of what a strong woman looks like. Then she goes to school and there's a woman at the front of the classroom. Then she goes to Sunday school and there's a woman at the front of the classroom. So girls have all of these wonderful examples of women who are leadership roles, who are just killing it and doing a great job. Boys are lacking those examples. So that's the first thing we do, is we guide them by surrounding them with good and godly men, and it puts them in an environment where they know what it means to be a man. And when you have a Supreme Court justice candidate who can't tell you what a woman is, how is an 8-year-old boy going to tell you what a man is? Well,
Wow.
we show him because we put him in environments where they're surrounded by good and godly men, and they're doing the outdoor kind of stuff. So that's the first thing, is that the boys are largely unguided, and we guide them by surrounding them with godly men. They're also ungrounded. What is it? 58% of Americans no longer believe that God and the Bible are the source of morality. You probably have a ton of statistics on that kind of stuff, the way the culture is going. So boys need that grounding. They need to know that there's truth. Boys like to know there's something that they can press up against, a foundation that they can stand on. And so our unapologetically Christian stance isn't just there because we want to call ourselves kind of a Bible Boy Scouts. It is there because boys need as a foundation. They need to know that there's truth. They like to know there's something they can push up against, that there is an absolute. And in a culture that doesn't recognize the Word of God as an absolute, we put it there, and that makes all the difference. If there was a better way of turning boys into godly men, I would be doing that. But it has to do with how we create a foundation for truth and surround them with godly men. And if I could go 2 more quick steps.
Yeah, I'm writing them down.
They're also unappreciated in our culture today. The gender blurring and the discounting of boys, not recognizing that boys and girls are different. Every legitimate science points to the fact that boys and girls are different. They just are. Developmentally, psychologically, biologically, chemistry, everywhere. Their eyes are different, their ears are different, their brains are different. Boys and girls are different. They behave differently in the womb even before they're born. It's not a social construct. It is by design. And it's a beautiful design that boys and girls are different. So to bring it unappreciated in a culture where we're discounting things like risk and competition, and we're removing things from their everyday lives that they need in order to excel. And that's the fourth thing, is boys are largely uninspired because we've taken risk and competition, giving them participation trophies, let's not keep score. We're taking out all the things that drive boys. Boys are much less likely to commit to something if there's not something at stake. And when we take that away, when you can run around on the soccer field as much as anybody else, or more than that, and everyone's going to get the same trophy, eventually you stop running around on the soccer field so
Right.
much. That goes cross-cultural. And what boys are finding out, I'm sure you know this, is now more girls and boys going to college. Boys are twice as likely to be in special education, 3 times more likely to have ADHD. They have fallen behind in every academic category. And it's just really sad what's happened there, because we've taken a lot of this risk and competition out of them. We do really keep score with grades. I mean, we know, like, 3.98, 3.6. We know that. We keep score in places where girls are really killing it. And in the places where boys get to apply themselves, where are we really keeping score? In video games. And that's why boys are going there in droves, because there's risk and competitions, there's levels, you know your score, you know exactly where that's why that virtual world is so attractive to them, because they're not finding it in the real world. I remember taking my boys to, I put them in a wide league when they were little, and the first thing the guy said is, we're not going to be keeping score. And my sons looked at me like, what? And I said, don't worry, boys, I'll be keeping score. I got you. Boys need that. They need that kind of inspiration. They need to know that there's that it matters what it is that they're doing. And that's why there's more young men living at home than since we started counting that in the census in 1960, the whole failure to launch thing, because we're not inspiring them to do great things. We're removing that kind of opportunity, discounting them, telling them that they're toxic, there's something wrong with them, like boyhood is some kind of social disease that needs to be eradicated, or boys are some kind of a defective girl. And this message is sinking in to boys, and they're feeling it, and it's showing in every area of their lives.
Yeah, I saw a couple of months ago an article by a radical feminist progressive. She's self-labeled. I'm not saying that on top of her. That's the way she described herself. But then she got married and started having children, and they were all boys. And she said her tribe abandoned her because she had boys. It was like, well, you basically had demon children. You must be possessed, right? Like it's some Rosemary's Baby movie or something. But they began treating her that way because there is that impression that, well, boys are bad and girls are good. So boys who are unguided, ungrounded, unappreciated, and uninspired, when they come to Trail Life USA, you got a lot of work to do to turn that around. Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear how you help, because you got a big range of boys. You got boys who are loud and aggressive. You got boys who are quiet or maybe more artistic or whatever, but they're all boys. They all have that same boyish design that God gave them as males. How do you help form them into a community where they begin to feel like this is a place where I can find hope?
Yeah. Well, boys are always asking 3 questions. Who's in charge? Who's with me? And what is our mission? And if you can answer those 3 questions for boys, you've got their hearts. So in Trail Life USA, not only are we doing the proven process, we're guiding them, we're grounding them, we're appreciating them, we're inspiring them, but we're answering those questions. Who's in charge? So we put them in patrols where they have a leader in that patrol, and it's peer-led, so they're leading one another. They start at 5 years old and they go up to 17, and as they get older in the program, they're taking more and more leadership to the point where the high school boys, the adults are just standing there in the room, and the boys are doing all the planning. But they understand who's in charge. They're electing a patrol leader or whatever it is. They know. They submit to that hierarchy. Boys like hierarchy. They like to know where they stand. Like I said, keeping score. Where do I stand? Where do I fit here? They're not so heartbroken when they lose. It's a great lesson. That's how boys develop empathy, is by losing, because they understand what it is to be the weaker one. And that's okay. That's what empathy is understanding somebody else's feelings or emotions. So we answer real clearly who's in charge, who's with me. That's the question that says, what am I a part of? And so by organizing them in these patrols on a larger basis, they're all trailmen, no matter what age they are, from 5 years old to 95 years old. The adults in our program are trailmen. The 5-year-olds in our program are trailmen. And so they're part of this bigger thing, and they're identifying with something bigger than they are. so that who's with me question is answered. And so, first of all, they're a trailman as part of the 65,000 of them that we have across the country. But then they're also part of a patrol, which may be 5 or 6 boys who may be the yellow ducks or the purple squirrels or the dinosaurs, whatever. They're going to name themselves and develop their own patrol, their own identity, their own flag, their own call, those sorts of things, because we're calling them, you're part of something bigger than you are. 65,000 people, it may just be 6 or 8 people. But that helps when you talk about the wildness that comes out in boys. That helps them because they want to be part of the troop and they want to be part of the group. They want to be part of the patrol. So they are following after the behaviors of that patrol. If you're not answering the question, who's in charge, who's with me for boys, they will be in charge and they will determine who's with them. And then the third thing is, what's our mission? When we take purpose and identity away from boys, which is what's happening in our culture with men and boys, if they lose their sense of purpose or sense of identity, they are really lost in a big way. So we give them clear missions. Now, it may just be, hey, we're going to hike 2 miles today. You need to find the water sources, or here's a map, plot it out, or what kind of food do we need to bring on our weekend camping, or how are we going to scale this mountain, or how are we going to approach this? So they're coming together in that group to form a mission. And they're committed to that mission with one another, and it takes all of them to get together. So that's how you kind of steer boys and get their hearts, is by answering those 3 questions. Now, where do we learn that from? What are some of the most successful boy organizations in the country right now? Is gangs. And what questions are they answering? Who's in charge? Who's with me? What is our mission? And boys will give their lives for that gang. They will go to jail for that gang because they answer those questions so clearly. So we do that in Trail Life USA. To think that we learn this from gangs. We do that in Trail Life USA. We answer those questions, and that raises the boy's commitment level to where there's a real strong sense of identifying with something bigger than he is, and he wants to be a part. And because he wants to be a part, you got to follow the rules if you're going to get a part. Be a part. So that helps him to manage his own behavior rather than have it being externally managed. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
Yeah, I love it. How does so I think all of those things are true because they're rooted in Scripture somehow. But I'm really curious, because this is a lot of the focus of our show, is how a biblical worldview informs that approach. And again, I think, I look at that and I can say, I can see their derivative from Scripture, no question about it. But I'd love for you to just talk about that a little bit. And I just love how articulate you are in explaining all. I've taken more notes probably than on any show that I've done recently.
They're recording this, Jeff. You can go back and listen to it later.
I'm a typical boy. I'm probably not going to go back and watch it again, but.
Well, let me answer that this way. Because we charter primarily with churches, 99% or something we have over 1,300 churches, almost 1,400 churches that charter Trail Life USA troops. Like I said, 65,000 members, all 50 states, and so we have this broad coalition of faith traditions come together. So not a lot of that comes from us as the home office, because that troop is taking on the faith traditions of that individual church that's expressing itself through the troop. The troop is owned by the local church. Okay. But you find in every bit of Trail Life what we call the carrot and the carrot cake. When you get a piece of carrot cake, you don't get big hunks of carrot in there, but you get carrot in every bite. So it's unmistakable that Christ's presence is infused in every badge, every program, every gathering, every icon, every thought. In the program, Christ is infused there, but it's not in a churchy way where the boy starts to feel like this is just Sunday school outdoors. It's more along the journey, and that along the journey thing allows him to take that Christian experience that he's getting walking alongside men on a trail and say, my Christian thing isn't the thing that I do for an hour and a half on Sunday, when we all use this churchy language. My Christian thing is every step of the trail, everything that I encounter, every ache in my body, every fear that I have, or I heard an animal and I'm not sure what it was. That's when they learn to access the greater one who is in them, out doing stuff rather than sit still, be quiet, pay attention, and I'll tell you who Jesus is. They encounter Jesus along the way, which is how Deuteronomy teaches us to teach the children. As you rise, as you lay down, as you walk. So along the way, they're encountering Christ and everything. So all of our badges have Christian worldview worked, and we have 6 essentials of Christian worldview. The boys can earn a challenge coin by talking about those things, and it's integrated in all that we do, the carrot and the carrot cake.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And that's the way to teach boys. Mm-hmm. If you have to sit them down in a classroom and lecture them, you're not talking. You're not talking as a boy or 2 boys. I mean, they've got to be out there doing stuff. One thing, Mark, I noticed. I was thinking about. I used to teach at a college in Tennessee, and they had the traditional sports, but there were a lot of young men who weren't involved in those sports. Mm-hmm. So they started other things. They started a bass fishing team, for example, and they became national champions. They fish as their sport, which I think is perfect. Because there are a lot of boys in the South who love to fish, and they'll get out on the boat and they'll do that. They're not going to play soccer, but they're getting outside. They're doing something, and they love doing it, and it's competitive. They know who wins. It's easy to measure the fish at the end of the day. They can compete. Doesn't matter what size of a college they are. They can compete against all the other colleges, no matter how big, because if you have people who know how to fish, then you're going to be relatively equal. But why is it, and now girls like to get outside too, but why is it so important for boys to have this outdoor component? Help us understand. I'm thinking of the mom who's got sons, and they mainly are they're doing video games and things, but in their heart, they really need to get outside to discover who they are. What's going on?
Yeah, well, the outdoors is this amazing kind of level playing field for fathers and sons to connect, for boys to connect with other boys, for boys to find, if he doesn't have a dad, for boys to find a dad like. We have a lot of single moms who place their boys in programs. They just want them around men. And it's sort of like, it's an expression of who it is they are, because it's wild. Where most of their lives, they're spending in places where it's sit still, be quiet, pay attention, and the outdoors just opens boys up to new possibilities, something different. So you got that going for you. You're right. They're not spending as much time in the outdoors as they used to in the past. We were always outdoors. Yeah. But growing up, I'm sure you were too. Yes. So it's different. So that's part of what's feeding our growth right now, and parents wanting their kids to get outdoors in a safe way and figure out the outdoors. But if you go back before that, this has always been thus. If you remember, if you go all the way back to the garden, Adam was created in the wild, and then he was placed in the garden. Eve came forth in the garden in a place of order. And so it's in us. It's in that God designed to kind of be in the wild, to be outside the confines of the square rooms and the desks in a line and all that, to be out there in that place. It's kind of in us. And so it begins with that connection with going back to what it was that we were created to be. And I just think there's something, I hate to use the word magical, but there's got to be a spiritual word. You could probably tell me what it is, that really connects our hearts to the place that we were, where we can really meet God. When you look at the life of Jesus, you see him sometimes in places. They'll lower somebody through a house. He was inside. He taught in the temple and things like that. But you also see him out cooking fish by the side of the lake, standing on a boat and ministering, and it's just kind of always been this way, where you really get a sense of the majesty of creation and the outdoors. That opens boys' hearts. Yeah.
What about, so let's say you got a boy coming in. I love this idea of single moms sending their kids so they have that male influence. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you why, and then I'll ask my question. At Summit Ministries, within 30 seconds of when I meet a young man, I can tell whether he has a masculinizing relationship with an older man.
Yeah.
Within 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. Because he will shake my hand, he'll look me in the eye. Yep. He respects and puts others first.
Yep.
And and some people say, well, okay, but what about the boys who don't have a dad in their home. Well, the exception proves the rule. Every young man who I see, who I can tell has a masculinizing relationship with his father, is matched by another boy who has a masculinizing relationship with a coach or with a scout leader or somebody who is a male who is speaking into his life.
Yep.
But I think there are a lot of boys for whom this is probably a little bit scary. They've kind of been at home. They haven't really been challenged to do much. They can play video games and compete and win and feel like they're part of a community. And all of a sudden mom says, you're going to go be a part of this thing and you're going to have to go outside. Is that a little intimidating to boys? And how do you sort of welcome them into that community?
Sure, it's intimidating. But what's wrong with intimidating? You know, and that's part and parcel of our culture. Well, let's do things that aren't intimidating. You know, no, you're going to encounter things, young man, in your life. You're going to walk into situations that are scary, that are different, that are uncomfortable for you, that are new to you. So this is just one of those. This is like that. And so yes, I don't know that you certainly want to be friendly and welcoming and create a path create a bridge for that boy to make the transfer into your organization so he can feel a part. And you do want to be intentional about things like calling him into that band of brothers. And that's why as quickly as possible, we want to get a uniform on him, get a handbook in his hand, get a patch that says what patrol he is and things like that. Because that helps him indicate, yes, this is where I fit. I fit here. I'm dressed like they are. I'm beginning to use the same language that they use. I understand the ranks of patrols. I understand how to start a fire with wet leaves. Whatever levels he's at, he's going further and further and into the culture to learn who he is. So I don't know that the question is how do we make it less intimidating. And I'm not saying you asked that, but yeah. But should we stop sending our boys places because it's new to them? Now, I will say that I love what you said about the masculizing influence on a boy, because we see that all the time. And we have a lot of men in our program, Dr. Jeff, who don't have a son in the program, but they're there because they want to pour into the next generation. And many of them have adopted the role of what we call a dad-like. And they're just the man who's just by osmosis, those boys are kind of grasping or attaching or connecting or looking and watching and understanding what it means to be a man, that boy without a dad. Real recently out in California, a young man received our second highest award. Came from a single parent household, lived with his mom, and he stood in front of that group of men when he got this award, and he said, I need to thank the men in this room. He said, you taught me how to shave, and you taught me how to love Jesus. And I thought, okay, those guys, they nailed it. And can you imagine being mom who's sitting in that audience to see your son get that award and hear him say that, and you're like, oh man, I nailed it. So yes, there is that thing, but look what it did in that boy's life. A man out in Texas, he came up to a troop meeting. He said, you see that boy over there? I said, yeah. He said, well, I've connected him with that man over there because he doesn't have a dad at home. And so that man makes sure that he has his handbook, that he understands the assignment. Because I think, my gosh, when I was in trail life with my sons, I was one out. We're headed out the door. Hey, you got your handbook, you got your tent, you got your sleeping bag. Do you remember your extra pair of drawers? I did all that stuff. What about a boy who doesn't have somebody doing that? And so these men, he started assigning men to boys, and he went on 4 or 5 different boys. That boy's connected with that man, and I had to stop and say, "Who are you?" and he said, "Well, when I was 9 years old, I lost my dad, and my mom put me in a program and surrounded me with godly men." And he said, "I can remember when I was 9 years old saying, I'm going to do that for other boys when I grow up." And he was just fulfilling that promise to himself to do that. That's such a powerful thing to identify for a boy who his band of brothers is. And you started out by talking about things like rites of passage, how we've lost those in our culture. They are built into trail life along the way, these numbers of rites of passage where boys are moving farther up into the organization, and somebody is saying to them, hey, I see you, I know you, I'm proud of you, you earned this, good on you, let's go on to the next challenge. And those are powerful lessons in the life of a boy.
This strikes me as such a critical part of where we need to be as a church right now. So if a church wants to get started, I assume they just go to the Trail Life website and they can find information on how they could begin patrol?
traillifeusa.com.
Okay.
There's actually a couple of resources there. They can join a troop, find out a troop in your area. You put in your zip code, it shows you the troops that are nearby, or they can start a troop. I'll tell you an interesting statistic is 18% of the adults in our troops join the church after they join the troop.
Oh, wow.
So they come in, they're drawn to the Trail Life program, and they start going to that church in that building once a week, and they meet some of the other people from their church body, and that becomes their church home. So it's an amazing growth tool when you talk about churches needing something like this. You know, only 36% of parents say that their local church is meeting the needs of their boys. But I can tell you, those aren't the churches that have Trail Life USA troops, because churches that are chartering Trail Life USA troops, they've got an answer to the boy problem.
Yeah. Now they don't have to say, okay, we're going to do this instead of youth group. This is something they can identify men who are in the church who would like to have an influence on younger men, but they don't really have a path. I think there are a lot of people who would be mentors if they knew what to do.
Yeah.
But somebody can say, here's your path. Then they can say to the young men, come into this, here's your path. This is just integrating into the life of the church. Is what I'm hearing. Yeah,
we see, and this is the difference between some Boy Scouts. We're not just a group that uses the basement of the church on Tuesday nights. We are an outreach of that local ministry. And churches that never chartered a Boy Scout troop are chartering Trail Life ministries because they're like, okay, that I get. That's going to grow godly men. And I'll tell you what, pastors who are trying to figure out, how do I get men engaged? Listen, we've had over 100,000 men go to the Trail Life USA program. These are guys who will sleep on the ground on a weekend in the rain. And, I don't know. I was a pastor for a while, associate pastor. I don't know that I could have gotten men engaged in the life of the church to the extent that they'll get involved with a band of brothers that becomes their best friends, that they're out hiking and camping and raising the next generation with. So you may, as a pastor, you may have a man who goes away to a men's conference or something, comes home and says, "Hey, pastor, I'm all on fire for Jesus. I want to do, give me something to do." And the pastor is kind of shrugs, like, "Can you help us park cars on Sunday?" It's really hard for men to find their place in the church. They can't work in the children's church. They can't work in the nursery. They can't work with the young kids. So what do we do with these men? But Trail Life USA gives that pastor a place to say, "Yeah, I see Jesus all over you. I see you wanting to serve him. I see you really wanting to get involved and do something, give back to the kingdom, to become active in ministry. Go see this guy. He's starting the Trail Life USA troop, and men are engaging at levels of ministry that they've never done before."
Yeah, I love it. Now, so let's say they meet on Wednesday nights, and the family says, "Okay, I've got my son here, but I've got a daughter as well." Is there a counterpart kind of program for girls that a church could look into as well?
There is. It's a program. There are sister program. They actually predate us by about 20 years because the Girl Scouts went off the tracks a long time before the Boy Scouts did. So American Heritage Girls was started by Patty Garibay. They're celebrating their 30th anniversary this year. Amazing program. And so you'll find a lot of churches that start both Trail Life and AHG. The whole family comes in that night. Mom and the girls, maybe they'll do their opening ceremony together, like separate organizations, totally separate organizations, because we focus on the boys, they focus on the girls, but they'll start together with their announcements and their Pledge of Allegiance and their oaths and things. And then the moms and the girls will go one way and the dads and the boys will go another way, and they run their own program. So an American Heritage Girls rounds out that family night. In fact, a pastor in Georgia called me recently. He says, for 20 years, I've been trying to get my people to show up on Wednesday night for my Bible study. He says, I can get some people to come, and it's the same people coming week after week after week. They walk in, they take notes, they go out. He says, so I told them, I'm done. On Wednesday night, if you have a boy, you sign up in Trail Life. If you have a girl, you put them in AHG. If you have neither, you come and you serve that next generation. He says, now my Wednesday nights are packed out, and people are engaging in ministry, and there's more growth going on there than I was getting out of my 20 years of of bringing whatever revelation I had.
Yeah,
So
well, good on that,
it's-
Pastor, for recognizing that.
Yeah, it's a powerful
Because,
pairing.
yeah, it's involvement. And children, they're just different. They just learn differently. And if you can take the girls, put them into that girls' environment, then they can learn to develop a strong identity without having the pressure of having to have the boys around. And the boys developing that identity separate from feeling like they've got to impress the girls, or that, well, every time I show up and a girl shows up, obviously the girl's going to win the Bible drill, so I don't even try, kind of thing. Man, this is so good. Well, thank you. Because we've been talking a lot about the spiritual growth of young men. We're noticing trends where there's a growing religiosity among young men. Mm-hmm. And it feels like what you're doing is, it just merges onto that highway so smoothly. I'm really glad to hear about it. So if people want to find you, they can find you at the website. We'll mention that again. But also, you guys are coming to different events, right? Like homeschool conferences and different conferences where you show up and people can come up and ask questions and find out a little bit more about what's going on, meet some of the people who are leaders, things like that. So if you're going to big events, conventions and things like that, be looking for the Trail Life USA group there. The one I was at, you guys had some kind of a huge tent-like structure that towered over everything else in the convention hall. It's not hard to find.
No, it's not. We're at a lot of homeschool conventions, and then also men's conventions. I speak at a lot of men's conventions. So we're out there, and then we're also on the website. Yeah.
Okay. Mark, well, thank you. Thank you for what you and your team are doing. I'm grateful for those 300 individuals. 300 is a number that shows up a lot in history when people are together and they're outnumbered and they decide to take a stand. And those 300 individuals who said there's something wrong and we can fix it. We can be part of the solution. I just salute them, and I'm so thankful for what God's doing through this ministry.
Yeah, no, I love the fact that we're grassroots. We're still volunteer driven. As large as we are, we only have less than 40 people on our national staff. We have 20,000 volunteers across the country who are the power and the engine of the program.
Yeah, love it. Well, thanks, brother. Thank you. Cheering for you.
Thank you, my friend. God bless.
Thank you to my guest, Mark Hancock, for coming on the show. You can learn more about Mark's work at traillifeusa.com. Well, here's a question for you. Does your teen or student struggle with doubts about their faith? Do you want to see them flourish in their walk with Jesus? If that's the case, I strongly encourage you to check out Summit's 12-day Biblical Worldview Conference and Camp program for young adults. During these 2 weeks, we equip students to defend, to own, and to live out a biblical worldview as they build community with other like-minded young adults. If you're interested in learning more, please go to summit.org/conferences. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.